Holdovers is an old school movie in every sense, textually. The setting, the aesthetic choices, the pace, the scope, it's all straight out of the 70s. Classic, but timeless. It's warm, despite the perpetually snowy setting. There's a decent amount of montage of New England in winter with soft acoustic guitar music playing over it. And we don't actually hear a Cat Stevens song until late in the movie, but within the first 5 minutes, I was like, I've never been more sure in my life that we're getting a Cat Stevens song at some point. And we did. Something I've realized about myself watching the Best Picture nominees for the last decade and a half is that this is the kind of movie that I'm often resistant to. For starters, this didn't play the fall festivals and came out around Thanksgiving. And every year, crops of Oscar hopefuls are released in January at Sundance, and in May at Cannes, and in August and September at Venice Telluride and Toronto. So by the time we get to mid-October, I have a sense of what movies I will have to care about for the next few months of award season. This is the Oscar field. We got it. And I know how stupid this sounds, but sometimes when a later breaking Oscar movie enters the conversation, I find myself thinking, no, we have our group of Oscar movies already. We're full up here. We don't need you.
Editor's note. The Holdovers did in fact premiere at the Telluride Film Festival on August 31st. So if I had a perception that The Holdovers was a later breaking Oscar contender, that's certainly a me problem and not a Holdovers release date problem. So my bad.
Secondly, this is clearly targeted at an older demographic, giving the nostalgia and the old schoolness of everything here. And I usually don't connect as well with the older demographic Oscar movies. So I went to go see this almost begrudgingly because it was getting Oscar hype. And I found instantly that I'm not resistant to this at all. As soon as we're introduced to Paul Giamatti smoking a pipe and grading papers, muttering,
Philistines. Lazy, vulgar, rancid little Philistines.
I was in. And I stayed in. My Twitter algorithm has fed me several takes like this, indicating that maybe this is how a lot of people are experiencing The Holdovers. They didn't think they'd like it, and then they like it a lot. The movie opens on the last day of classes before Christmas break at a prestigious boys' boarding school in New England called Barton Academy.
I can't fail this class.
Oh, don't sell yourself short, Mr. Coates. I truly believe that you can.
As I said, we immediately meet Professor Paul Hunnam, a sardonic and acerbic ancient Civ teacher, and we're also quickly introduced to Angus Tully, played by Dominic Sessa, a junior who's really excited to spend his Christmas in St. Kitts. And finally, we meet Mary Lamb, played by Da'Vine Joy Randolph, the head cook at the school who recently lost her son fighting in Vietnam. Against his will, Hunnam is tapped to be the faculty supervisor for the boys holding over at the school, i.e. the ones who aren't going home and are staying on campus for the Christmas break. Angus then gets a concerning call from his mom that she and her new husband are tabling the family trip to St. Kitts to instead use the Christmas break as an opportunity to take their delayed honeymoon, just the two of them, which leaves Angus behind with the titular Holdovers. He's understandably irate, seemingly less so about missing out on St. Kitts, and more so that his mom is in no uncertain terms choosing her new husband over time with her son. And during this conversation, Angus says,
"And what about Boston? You promised on the way we'd spend some time in Boston."
Angus, listen to me. This is our new family, okay? I know you miss your father. I do too. But there's someone new in my life.
Little vague on the details, only 19 minutes into the movie, but there are obvious conclusions to draw from this. Angus feels less like a holdover and more like a left behind, or a leftover. Notably, Angus brings up Boston again to his fellow holdover students. He says they should take a car and go somewhere, like Boston for instance. And a little later, after circumstance has reduced the holdover population to just Hunnam, Mary, and Angus, he again suggests going to Boston, pitching it to Hunnam as an educational field trip of sorts and a break from their cooped-up captivity. And it's only when they finally get to Boston, the last third of the movie, that Angus's whole thing is really revealed. Yes, he's upset with his mom for leaving him behind for a vacation with his stepdad, but the assumptions you may have made based on that initial phone call in Act 1 were probably not quite right. There's more going on here. Suffice to say, Angus's anger at being left behind by his mom takes on a whole new light. Director Alexander Payne says he got the idea for The Holdovers from a 1930s French movie, and a TV pilot set at a New England boarding school in the 1970s came across his desk, and he thought, That's pretty close to what I'm going for. So he reached out to the writer of the TV pilot, David Hemmingson, and commissioned him to rework the pilot into a feature, and The Holdovers was born. Payne said that The Last Detail was an inspiration here. That's a Hal Ashby movie from 1973, similarly about three people, one of them a young man, forced to spend a week together, initially at odds, but ultimately finding common ground. I'm less familiar with Hal Ashby's work than I am with the reputation of his work, but it tracks that an Ashby movie from 73 would be the template here. Barton Academy is a fictional boarding school, but they shot this largely at the real-life Deerfield Academy in Massachusetts. And while they apparently went through 800 kids to cast Angus, Payne ultimately chose Dominic Sessa, who was a senior at Deerfield at the time. He gives a really remarkable performance, but given the context that he'd never acted on camera before, and he was just scooped up from the school they happened to be shooting at, makes it a super remarkable performance. You may recognize Da'Vine Joy Randolph from High Fidelity or Only Murders in the Building or The Idol, but Alexander Payne says he encountered her and was struck by her in Dolomite Is My Name from a few years ago. And she's completely wonderful in this. The acting categories are seemingly more competitive this year than they've been in recent years. In actress, you got Lily Gladstone and Emma Stone with Sandra Hüller right there. In actor, you got Cillian Murphy and Paul Giamatti. In supporting actor, you got Robert Downey in a pretty firm lead, but with some feasible spoiler opportunities. But if I had to choose one Oscar lock this year, it's Da'Vine Joy Randolph in supporting actress. Congratulations. Mary initially seems to be holding it together pretty well, given what she's going through. You know, she's putting on a brave face, but that can only last so long. And the breakdown is inevitable, but still heartbreaking. In the middle of the movie, the three remaining holdovers are invited to a Christmas party at the home of Miss Crane, a friendly co-worker from Barton. And as Alexander Payne pointed out in his interview for the Directors Guild of America podcast, each of the three characters gets a moment here where the sound of the party cuts out and they have a quiet, reflective moment alone. For Mary, it's while she's sitting listening to an Artie Shaw record because her son loved Artie Shaw and she's getting drunk and emotional, and then she kind of gets out of hand on both those accounts. Angus's quiet moment is when he stares into a snow globe with a wry, nostalgic smile, which we again don't really get context for until he goes to Boston later. Hunnam's moment comes after a promising, semi-flirtatious conversation with Miss Crane, this after Angus noting the two of them have chemistry a few scenes earlier, and then having those romantic hopes dashed in an instant. He has his quiet moment of resolve and loneliness after that. That scene where Angus notes the chemistry between Hunnam and Miss Crane is when Hunnam and Angus go get burgers, and their waitress is, surprisingly, Miss Crane, earning extra money over the holidays picking up a few shifts. So when Hunnam orders his Jim Beam on the rocks from her, he says it like he's being adventurous, like it's an idea that's just hitting him, like a, ooh, why not?
I will have a cheeseburger as well.
2 cheeseburgers.
And, Jim Beam. Oh. On the rocks.
Why?
Please.
And this is obviously an act. By this point in the movie, we've already seen him go to bed hammered with a bottle of Jim Beam, smelling like alcohol at 11 a.m., gladly accepting whiskey from Mary every time he sees her. So he's putting on a little bit of a performance to save face with his coworker here. The point here is he can't go one dinner without a Jim Beam, even if it means the risk of revealing too much about himself to his coworker. That's telling. Later, after an unpleasant, low-key humiliating interaction with an old college roommate, Hunnam beelines for the corner liquor store and stalks around the liquor store looking for his Jim Beam, his crutch, his security blanket. And I think the whiskey as security blanket pays off nicely in the final shot of the movie. Each of these characters, Hunnam, Angus, and Mary, are all alone over the holidays for different reasons. With Mary, we learn immediately why. It's the very first thing we learn about her.
My little sister Peggy and her husband invited me to go visit them in Roxbury, but I feel like it's too soon. Like Curtis will think that I'm abandoning him, you know? This is the last place that my baby and I were together, not including the bus station.
For Angus, again, we get an immediate literal reason why he's alone, but we eventually get more context for it. For Paul Hunnam, there's not exactly an immediate singular reason why he's alone. The reason is mostly just that he's like this. There's no one in his life. He's insular.
Now, most of the kids dislike you, pretty much hate you. Teachers too. You know that, right?
I find the world a bitter and complicated place, and it seems to feel the same way about me. I think you and I have this in common.
The movie kind of slowly peels back why he's like this, but there isn't a big aha moment. We learn more and more about him and what makes him tick, but this is kind of just how he is. But you leave the movie thinking he could be better, that maybe he'll be less insular in the future. One aspect of the conversation around this movie is that people have been identifying it as a pretty instant holiday classic. Again, I saw this in theaters over Thanksgiving weekend, and within 15 minutes, I was immediately thinking, I have got to make my parents watch this over Christmas. Which I did. Not hard to see why people are reacting this way. Obviously, it's textually a movie about the holidays, but it's specifically about how sometimes the holidays aren't as magical or wonderful like they are in so many other movies. And sometimes the holidays can be isolating, and the people you're forced to spend time with around the holidays aren't always the people you would choose to spend time with, but that time spent is meaningful nonetheless.
I don't think I've ever had a real family Christmas like this before. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
The movie is about family, both literal and found, and about finding common ground and empathy and understanding for the people you're forced to spend the time with. But I also like that this is specifically about that time from a few days before Christmas through the day or two after New Year's and the ups and downs that this week and a half can have in store. Personally, that's always one of my absolute favorite times of the year because I happen to really love the people that I get cooped up with, but also because I get to watch a lot of movies during that week off of work. And I expect The Holdovers will be a welcome addition to the rotation because it's just what I want. A special movie for a special time.